Hello everyone. This video is going to be helpful for those who want to be able to rename the column names in Power Query in bulk. So perhaps for all of your columns at once with a bit of logic. Okay, stay tuned. It's been too many times that I work with customers that work with column names that are just not in the right format. Perhaps your database administrator likes to have underscores for spaces. Perhaps there's no spaces at all and there's just a Camelcase where each of the words starts with a capital and all of the other letters in the word are lowercase. But perhaps you want to split all of those kind of things. I'm going to show you a few methods in this video on how you can fix this in bulk so that each of those fields and even future fields will be adjusted in an easy way. And I will first start showing you one method that's very flexible. And to the end of this video, I will show you another method, which I think you will prefer. So stick till the end. Okay, so let's have a look at the screen. The first set that I'm looking here has Camelcase. That means that product key starts with a capital P and has a capital K as well. And instead, what we would like is a space between these. Order date key, that's the same issue. We want to have a space between order, date, and key. And the way to do that is always to have a good look at where the capital letters are. And we don't want to do this by hand, because if we do this by hand, then we're going to have to do this, product key. Then we're going to have to write order date key. And of course, while this is really valid, and in the top of the screen here, you're going to see that it works, we're going to have to write this for each of the columns. With as a downside that if one of the column names changes, then your query will break. If you get new columns, they will be missing in your formula and you will have to adjust. And also if some columns will be deleted, your query will also break because it will try to rename a column that doesn't exist. The method I'm going to show you does not have these issues. They will just apply certain logic to all of the column names. And we're going to try this in different tables. Okay, so let's get started. So the first way I want to show you is about renaming columns. And as you can see in the top here, when you rename something, you will always find the old name and the new name within curly brackets altogether. And that's the same for the second set that has been renamed right there. So if this would continue, you'd have all kinds of sets of names that come together. That's good to know. We are going to make use of this with our renaming function later. Before we get there, I first want to show you something that you will need to transform your columns. So what I usually do with the table renaming, I make a new step, first of all, that's now referencing the previous step called source. You can wrap this in a function called Table.RenameColumns. And this function needs a table that has columns, obviously, and will return you a list of all the column names that you have. So if I click OK, you'll find that these are the column names that were from the step called source. In the future, if any of the columns are removed or added, this list will simply refresh and either have more items or less, or with different names. Okay. The next step is finding out how we can transform this to get spaces in between the words. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know this by heart, so let's take the easy way out here. If you convert this one to table, as a first step, then you can then go to add column. And there is this AI feature in Power Query that says column from examples. So if you click from selection right there, you will find that a new column appears. And in this new column, you can just write your expected values. So in the first part, I write product, space, key. Then you press enter. Then for the next one, I write order, date, key with spaces. Now watch what happens. If I click enter now, Power Query will try and recognize what happens. It will try and recognize what logic I mean, and then come up with a suggested solution. So I'm going to press OK here now. And the suggested solution from Power Query is to have this piece of code. And the result of applying that piece of code is all of the column names here. And from the looks of it, this is exactly what I'm looking for. It's a very complex function. I would not have cooked that one up myself. But hey, this is how AI can help you. So let's see if we can just make use of this. So we press OK. Perfect. So we already have this column available right now. And this is really what we need to transform the columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the code that was generated right here. Or you know what? We can make it even easier. We can just now right-click here and click on drill down. And now we have the list with the already transformed column names that we needed. Okay, there is a step left for us. So I want to go back to our original query with set source. So this one is just back to source. So what I did is I made sure that this step here just simply refers back to the source step. And that's all we need. And the custom step here is already the transformed columns. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so far, the only thing we've done is we made some logic in how we can transform this. And now the next step is going to be the magic to actually rename everything. So as we saw earlier, if I want to rename something, then the logic for this is we need different sets for renaming. We need the old name and the new name. We need the old name and the new name, and that for every set that we need. Now it's very difficult to write this in an easy way. However, Power Query has a function that can do that for you. And that function is called List.Zip. And if we go to this website here, then you'll find that List.Zip, I put it right there. Your List.Zip can input different combinations of values. So if I have ABC here in lower letters, then I can have a capital ABC in the second set of values. And the result of putting this in the function is actually these sets next to each other. Now, in our case, we can use this by just writing old values, new values. Okay, let's see if we can apply that. So for our renaming, what we're going to need instead of this here is we're going to use List.Zip. So our List.Zip function, List.Zip, first needs a list of items that it wants to rename, the old names. So here we could say something like table column names, and then from the previous step called back to source. And this is nothing special yet. This will simply generate a list of names that were already there. And now as a second argument for List.Zip, we're going to need the transform column names. And we already had that. That was right here in the earlier step. So we could just reference that part called transformed columns. Okay. And then we can close this down. And let's see what happens if we do this. I think we still in List.Zip need to wrap this around curly brackets. We need a token comma. Okay, I need to have a quick double check. So List.Zip needs this, needs a list of lists and a comma. So this is a list, this is a comma, and this one goes out and we close the bracket. Perfect. Okay. As you can tell, it's always good to double check the formatting, but the List.Zip, if you look on my website, it just requires you to input a list with the curly brackets. And if your function already returns a list, then it just needs the outside brackets. Okay, so what did this just do for us? This actually renamed the columns that we needed. So all of these columns right here now have spaces in between the capital letters, and nothing here was hard-coded. Okay. So this was the manual way on how you can do that. Or it's dynamic, but it's a little bit more of a broad way. Let's see if we can do the same for renaming underscores. So similarly for renaming underscores, we can again say, sure, table rename, column name. We have the source step. There we go. And instead of having a separate column, we could also use list transform. And we can just say that for each of the items in the list, we could say like, each text.replace. And we want to replace an underscore by a space. Because this might be fun for your database, but in Power BI, you might want to have a bit more of a friendly code. Perfect. So this little piece of code that we have here actually transformed the list that we needed. And we can then just say here, transformed columns. Now we're going to make a new step, which is going to be referencing to the source step, which is the earlier one. And here again, we can do the renaming. So we're going to call this one like that. And again, this second part, we are going to replace it with the List.Zip function. So we write List.Zip and we write Table.Column names from our previous step or from the source step. It doesn't really matter. And then we actually want to have our transformed column names in here so that the old names are replaced by the new names. And this List.Zip function, I believe it wanted things in brackets here. So we close it and we go there. And as you can see, compared to the previous step, all the underscores are now also replaced by spaces. Very similar. And I'm going to show you another way that's very similar. We can do something with a prefix as well. So you can make this very flexible. So if you have a code like this, you again start out with table.column names. You write source. Okay. And instead of having just this, maybe you just want to have something with a prefix. And again, you can say, I want to have a list transform. It will transform all the items here. And we can write each and then text combine. And we want to combine the value. But you know what? We can have a, we can have this and say like, we have like a prefix dot. And then we want to combine it with something called, which is actually each of the values in the list. And that's just represented by the underscore right here. And we close the brackets. Okay, so the function here just took the table column names and just put a prefix before it. And all that's left to do is the same as we did earlier. So we can reference the source step equals source. And it's capital sensitive. And then just to have a template, we can rename this and we adjust what we have in the top. Very similar to what we had earlier. So List.Zip. It's a little bug in Power Query that sometimes jumps up and makes the code wrong. And here again, we say table column names from the source step. We're going to put this in curly brackets, and then this will be our custom one step, which is our transform column names. We will just change that around later. So this one actually should be called transformed columns. And if we then go back to our latest step here, then also the renaming here happened with the List.Zip. Okay, so this is the first method that we can use. You can rename your columns based on let's call this a translation list that you actually input in List.Zip. Very helpful, very efficient, a little more complex. I'm going to show you another way to do each three of those, and I think you're going to be a fan because it's even easier. If we go back to that rename Camelcase, then we already know what code we used. So we had this complex piece of code here. That's what we use to actually transform our columns. I'm going to show you how we can make use of that. So let's say that we are here. Now, I want to introduce you to something that is another function. So previously we used a function called Table.RenameColumns. So it said in the top here, Table.RenameColumns, and we then had to input the old list and the new list. But there is also a function which is table transform column names. Table transform column names, which also takes the source. And I'm just going to show you something fun here because this is going to be very easy. If I write something like this, just write each, then nothing is going to change. But if I would now write something like this, each prefix dot, and then an ampersand and write that part, then all of a sudden we already have our prefix here. So with a very small piece of code, you can make your translation here. Okay, so the Camelcase had this pretty complex piece of code, which said each, let, and then all of this. we got that to the column to take from the column from examples. So make use of that. Okay, so copy paste. Now I can take this part and just put it right here. So as a first argument or a second argument of the transform column names part, I put this piece of code, and there's one thing we need to adjust, because this code actually references a column right here. And when we're transforming each of these values, we don't have a single column. So we can actually say, remove the column reference and just write an underscore. We just need an underscore here to reference each of the underlying values. And now with a single step, if I go back, we have source. And on custom one, I actually perform the transformation on each of the column types. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Now we can do the same for the underscores. So if we go to this part, we could, for example, say we need a new step. And then we can just write, we're going to translate this, and we just need a little bit of a different code. So if you want to replace all the underscores, we could say each text replace each of the values, all the underscores, and replace it with a space. Now if I press OK, the previous step showed the underscores, and this step doesn't. Very easy. Now I'm going to still show it for the prefix, and after that I'm going to also show you how you can conditionally do that. So stay tuned. So we're going to look at the prefix here, and we're going to do something similar. And I seem to have left some code here. So if I want to change something right there, I can again say, sure, I want to go here, and the prefix is prefix dot, and then equals the underscore. I actually think we just did that. Let's see. So each prefix. That makes sense. I just deleted the first step. That's not very good. Let's see. If we Control Z, then we can just have this new step right there. Exactly. So our prefix is also done like it. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to make this a little more interesting even, because so far we have adjusted all of the columns. But perhaps you're telling me that no, we don't just want to do this for all the columns. We just want to do it for all the columns that don't have the word date in there. Is that possible? Of course, that's possible. Okay, so we want to have the word prefix for each of the columns that don't have the description date in there. So how do you do that? Let's take the easy way. We can use table transform column names, and we can add a condition here. So for each of the column names, we can say each if text contains, and then we can just write an underscore to make sure it checks it for every column. If it contains the word date, then return the original column, so then the underscore, and otherwise, else return the prefix. Now if we go back to the source, you'll find that first, these are the original names. And if I click on custom, you'll find that actually these date keys, they have remained the same. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so that works great. Now, you can even make this more complex, of course, because if I write date here and do it lower letters, it's not going to recognize it. But the text contains function also has a comparer. So I could write comparer, ordinal, ignore case. And also then it will recognize each of these. So this is super flexible. This is going to make your solution dynamic. You can work together with your database administrator, and it's just going to save a lot of time for you in adjusting your formulas. Okay, so what did you think? Was any of these solutions new for you? Do you know a better way? Did you like it? I hope you learned something. And if you don't want to miss out on more of these kind of videos, I recommend to subscribe, click the bell button. And with that, I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.